Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. What topics do you try to avoid? You know, those things that are real, but talking about it feels uncomfortable. For example, people never want to talk about bad breath. And I can tell you, years ago, as a division chief, I had to talk to one of my staff members about his breath. It was one of the hardest conversations that I had, and I prepared for it, and I think it worked out, but it was hard. But another topic is taxes. Some believe avoidance of taxes is skirting the law. Some believe that it's your obligation to avoid them. And some feel that if you never really understand it, you worry less. It's a big topic, and it's a topic that lots of people avoid. It's even believed that there are only two topics that should never be in polite society: religion and taxes. Okay, we'll avoid those. And instead today, we'll talk about death. That other topic that no one talks about. Like taxes, however, it can't be avoided. This is the second show with Chris Palmer, talking about his book, Achieving a Good Death. The first show was about what all of you should be thinking about, actually, from the moment you step out from under your parents' protection. I mean, we talked about wills and legacy letters and ethical wills and memoirs, ways we can attend to how our things are distributed and our reputations are remembered. We talk about decluttering and getting organized so that those who inherit or become responsible for it have a bit less to deal with, other than that junk drawer in everybody's kitchen. And then we talked about anticipating the possibility of becoming incapacitated, yet still being able to direct how you will be treated in those moments through advanced directives and healthcare agents. Now, if you're 20, you know that you're immortal. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I never thought about death. Hey, it was a long, long way ahead of me. Now, if you're 40, you know that it's getting to be that time to think about what happens if something untoward happens. I know that's when my husband and I began talking about the will, which we then put together. Now, if you're in your 60s, you know you better attend to it now. But at any age, the message that Chris Palmer offers that makes it all make sense is that to have a good death, you must care to have a good life, one that keeps you healthy so that you remain in control when death is in the next room. Today, however, we're going to think about the options when death is in the next room, about how we can keep as much control as possible, and about the support we will need. Now, if this is not immediate for you, and I hope it is not, consider beloved family members who are closer. Today we have control. Today we have time to set things in place. Let's learn and decide for ourselves. Well, my guest today is Chris Palmer, and I'm going to bring him right back on the screen.
Hi, Madelyn.
Hello, Chris. Welcome back to Unlocked.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, as I've told you before, Chris Palmer is author, speaker, wildlife filmmaker, conservationist, educator, professor, grandfather, and end-of-life activist. And he devoted most of his professional life to conservation and now focuses his energy on one of life's profound frontiers: aging, death, and dying. But Chris, before we get into the serious stuff, I'd love to ask you, I mean, you were once nominated for an Academy Award. Did you watch the awards last night?
I did.
Did you?
Well, no, sorry. My wife watched for me. So I actually worked on my next book. I was writing. But you know, I worked closely with Bob Redford and others. And so when that came on, Barbara Streisand's tribute to him. Gail, my wife, called me down, and I watched that. So it's wonderful having a partner who can look out for you, because I was able to be comfortable in my study here working, knowing that if something I should watch something, Gail would call me down. So so I actually didn't. I just watched the key parts of it for me.
Oh, marvelous. I wish I had that facility. Well, now that those things are aside, let's get into our subject. Why are people so reluctant to talk about death and dying?
Well, they are scared, just like I was scared. I'm 78. When I was in my 60s, as you were pointing out in your introductory remarks, I realized that I was going to die. Before that, death was something else, something that other people did.
Yeah.
And it wasn't related to me at all. But when I got to 60, roughly, I realized that I was going to die, and it scared me. It really scared me and upset me, and this is why people don't want to talk about it, because it's scary. Kids don't want to talk about it with their parents because they worry that the parents might think that by talking about it, it's going to bring it on in some way, which is nonsense. And parents don't want to talk about it with their children because they don't want their children to worry. And doctors don't talk about it with their patients because, as we learned from Atal Gawande's marvelous book, Being Mortal, doctors don't know much about death and dying. Paradoxically, they don't study it in medical school, very little. They're doing a little better now, but they still don't do a lot of it. So many doctors are petrified of dying, and maybe that's why they got into medicine in the first place. And they avoid talking about it because to them dying is failure. They go to law, they go to medical school to learn how to keep people alive, and when people die, they have failed in their job, so they're not very good. I'm just talking generally, obviously lots
Yeah.
of exceptions, but generally doctors don't like talking about it either. So those are some of the reasons, Madeline, that people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was reminded of a conversation I had with my grandson. He was 12 at the time. And I asked him, now, someday your grandmother's going to die. Would you like me to be buried in a place where you could visit? Or would you like me to be, scattered? Well, his parents went crazy because they didn't want to talk about this. Well, to the 12-year-old grandson, he said, "Oh, well, I think," and then he gave me his opinion.
Mm.
And I thought to me, that was an excellent way to just let the subject be there. It's not anathema.
Right.
It's a subject.
Yeah.
So
Well
thank
done.
you for that memory.
Yeah. That's a great story, and yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, he's much older now. I'm not sure I could approach him quite so facilely.
Right.
Well, now you argue in your book that we should develop a mindset of intentional simplification as we grow older.
Hmm.
Talk about what that means.
Well, as we get older, we sort of, our bandwidth gets reduced, and we don't have the capacity to handle as many things as when we were younger. So it just makes sense to have for an attitude of intentional simplicity. And this actually came into focus just this last 2 weeks, because Gail and I, my wife and I, we've been married over 50 years, had just got back from 2 weeks in Florida. When we were in Florida, people tried to persuade us to buy a house down there on the beach, and it was very tempting, but it didn't take me long to say no at all, because I am driven by intentional simplicity. At age 78, I don't want to be complicating my life with papers and tax things and complications. No, I'm at a stage in my life, and everybody roughly my age should be in the same, is of simplifying things and getting rid of possessions, getting rid of properties, going from 2 cars to 1 car, and it's simplifying things. And so by Intentional simplicity. What I'm driving at there is that we should every day try and do take steps which simplify our lives, make it easier for our heirs to take care of what we leave behind. I have a friend whose mother was 98 and she loved her and she died. But when she died, was a hoarder, and when she died, this friend of mine, who told me this story, said she had to clear out two homes
Mhm.
full of possessions and stuff, and she was grieving her mother, but she was also furious with her mother. How could her mother do this to her when she was busy with work and family? And now she had about 6 months clearing out this junk, and she was furious. So, and that's a little example of what of the benefits of intentional simplicity. It's simplifying things, getting rid of books we no longer read, getting rid of possessions we no longer want or need, and so on. So that's what I mean.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking anybody could take that on as a living principle because we tend to overcomplicate our lives
So
in
true.
today's environment.
So true.
And what it does is it releases you to have time, for example, with your family or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox. You also talked about advanced directives because they
Yeah.
allow a patient to choose the medical care they wish to receive at the end of life when they can no longer speak for themselves, which had never occurred to me until you mentioned that. And I actually have told many people about that, and they go, "Oh yeah." Well, anyway, I appreciated how you presented this in the book. You said that the directive needed to be a kind of litmus test. It wasn't a question of what you want to be, that you don't want to be resuscitated or not, or whatever, but rather what you want to be able to do. I, I think it'd be useful to give a couple of examples of things that a person should think about. What is it that I want to be able to do up until the end?
Well, um, thanks for raising this because this is such an important point. Um, First of all, I should say that many people have not done advanced directives, only about 40%, and in communities of color, it's down to 20%. So we all need that number has to change, has to be raised. More of us need to do advanced directives, and to get one, just go to your state attorney, the attorney general's office for your state you live in, and get it there and fill it out. It's very straightforward. Um, and what it does, as you point out, Madeline, is that it states how you want to be treated when you can no longer talk for yourself, and it involves appointing a healthcare agent. They go by other names, healthcare proxy, and medical power of attorney, things like that. But I'm going to call it healthcare agent. It's just simply somebody who can represent you when you can no longer talk for yourself. Somebody who knows you well and knows what you would have done.
Mhm.
Um, because when you're lying in an ICU or an emergency room or in a nursing home and you can't talk, either because you're intubated or because you're no longer conscious or whatever the reason, you need somebody there who can say, look, this is what Chris wanted. He did not want to be intubated. He didn't want to have a peg feed and so on. Back to your point about the litmus test. The point here is to state what you think is worth having in
Mhm.
life. So, in other words, if you might say, look, if I've got a dementia and I no longer recognize my partner, no longer recognize my grandchildren, have really sort of lost my mind as what happens when you have advanced dementia, then please let me go. Give me an exit. If I get pneumonia, don't give me an antibiotic. Let the pneumonia gently take me away. Yeah, deal with the pain and so on, but let So this is the point about the litmus test is that then a healthcare agent can say to the doctor, well, if you're saying Chris needs a hip replacement, if you give Chris a hip replacement, what what is he going to be like? What's his life going to be like? And then the doctor will say, well, he won't be able to garden. He won't be able to do this and this and this. And then the healthcare agent will say, well, Chris told me he only wants to go on living if he is able to do A, B, and C. And you, doctor, have said he won't be able to do A, B, and C. Therefore, do not do these. Do not do what you're suggesting because it's not what he wants. It's not in alignment with his values. So this is what we mean by litmus test: laying out the conditions that where you want to continue living or not continue living.
I really, really appreciate it. It made it so clear to me, and I began thinking myself, and your first point, I want to be able to recognize people, so that I can continue a relationship with them. That certainly is one of the most important. I'd also like to be able to walk.
Yeah.
But maybe I have to think about that one a little more. Okay, litmus test. All right. You also talk in your book about a team that you really need to have. So, who's the most important person to have on your team? You've mentioned already an agent. Are there others?
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, yes, absolutely. Partners, children, spouses, love people who love you. I mean, in the doctors, nurses, an end of life doula. Oh, so there's a big team. But if I had to pick one person who is the most important and who is likely, but not doesn't have to be likely to be your healthcare agent, it would be the person who loves you most in the world, your partner, because that's somebody who can stick with you, will be loyal to you, will represent you as well as they can. And that person, as I say, is likely to be your healthcare agent as well, who has then the authority to talk on your behalf if you can't talk for yourself. So, but it's hard to answer the question who's the most important, because as things evolve, that different people will have different roles to play. But certainly, amongst the most important is the healthcare agent and the person. They may be the same person, and the person who loves you the most and wants the best for you, because that's what you want at the end of life. You want someone who can speak for you and say what you would have said were you able to talk for yourself.
Yeah. You mentioned that the healthcare agent has to have backbone. I love that. Because I can imagine that they have to really be firm at times with them, particularly the medical community, I would assume.
Yeah. Well, two things. One, the medical community, you're quite right, but also other family members who become obnoxious or don't understand what the dying person wants. So you do need somebody with backbone. And what I mean by that is somebody who knows the patient who's dying well, and so can really talk for them. And so when the doctor says, well, and most doctors won't do this, but there are some. When the doctor says, or if the doctor says, well, I disagree with what's in the advance directive. I don't care that Chris said he doesn't want to be intubated. I, as a doctor, think he should be, and I think I know better than him what is best for him. When a doctor behaves in that sort of arrogant way, not a patient-directed way, but a doctor-directed way, you need someone with backbone who can stand up strongly, look the doctor in the eye and say, wait, Chris told me explicitly he does not want that, and you are not to do it. And equally, if you have a family member who perhaps has been neglectful, has not seen the parent maybe for a year, flies in from the other side of the country, 3,000 miles, arrives feeling guilty and starts shouting, we must do everything we can to save Chris. We have to do everything we can. Doctor, do everything you can to save him, to bring him back. Lord, don't let him die. If you have a family member, and doctors call those family members seagull relatives because they shit on everybody and make a mess of things. If you have someone like that who thinks they're doing the right thing but are not doing the right thing because they don't really know what the patient wants, then you need someone, again, a healthcare agent with backbone, to stand up to that rogue family member. So that's why I say you need someone with backbone.
A couple of thoughts come to mind. One is with this seagull person, they're probably racked with guilt.
Yeah.
Now, there also is a need for other people to assist. I mean, I can imagine that the person who is 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 that person you talk about so close to you, they get tired. So, what are some of the caregiving things that make it so hard to do? And I'm not sure anybody really appreciates it unless they've lived through it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're raising this question about caregiving, Madeline, because it's a horrific problem that it's kind of hidden away. People in their homes and no, we don't see them, and so it's something that the population in general, Americans in general, don't really recognize. But we need to do something about it because we have 53 million people in America who are caregivers. Most of them women, almost all of them unpaid, and they are doing this thankless task. I say thankless because the person they're looking after is often has lost some cognitive capacity and no longer really appreciates all that's being done for them. Their dirty diapers changed, they're taken to the doctor, the feeding them, moving them so they don't get bed sores, being able to give them medicine and so on. The list is almost infinite of what has to be done, and it's exhausting. And one problem with caregiving is that caregivers, as I say, most of them unpaid women, they're so devoted that they tend to neglect their own well-being.
Yes.
And this is terrible. They don't eat properly, they don't sleep properly, they don't get enough breaks, they don't relax, because they are devoted to their loved one who they're trying to keep alive and look after. And it's a shocking thing. So yeah, caregiving, big problem. We need to do something about it. Caregivers need more help and support. And it's I can't say enough about how this is a neglected issue in this country.
Yeah. Another thought occurred to me, and I'm kind of jumping back to our earlier conversation about the agent being very strong. It's as you were talking about how they had to be tough uh, and have backbone. I was thinking, well, there's a real advantage then for writing down, as you call it, writing down specifically what you need, that directive. The fact that it's written down gives them additional strength as well.
Absolutely. Such a good point. Yeah, writing it down, which is what the whole point of an advanced directive is. You have it in writing how you want to be treated. Which I should say, in fairness, you might write down, do everything you can to keep me alive. I want CPR. I want to be intubated. I want a mechanical ventilator. I want a peg feed. I want a hip replacement if I need it. Do anything you can to keep me alive, regardless of my quality of life. I mean, anyone has the right to say that. We should be in a patient-directed environment where what patients want they get. But for me, none of that. None of that. So now I've forgotten your question.
That the directive should be written down.
Oh yes, and yes, and let me also add to that, Madeline, that really writing it down is just the first step. The second step is to have the conversation, is to
Mm.
talk with people, and talk with your loved ones, so they know, so that you can almost use the advanced directive as an excuse to get the conversation started. Oh look, I've done this advanced directive. Don't know if you ever seen one before, but here it is. Take a look. This is how I want to be treated, and then go on from there. So writing it down and talking about it, both very important.
Mm. Well, you now let's come back to the caregivers because there are different kinds of care that you can ask for, and I really appreciated that you distinguished palliative care versus hospice care and other things. Uh, What are the critical factors, and what maybe you should define what those are, and then
Sure.
because if this is the first time you've had to deal with, say, a spouse that's dying, you may never have thought about that question.
Yeah, yeah. Very, very, very good question. So palliative care is 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 care, medical care, which deals with the symptoms. It doesn't cure the
Mm.
disease that's hurting you. So, in other words, when you get a diagnosis of a serious disease, prostate cancer, pancreatic cancer, doesn't matter, heart disease, whatever it is, you should say to the doctor in the hospital, do you have palliative care? Do you offer palliative care? So this goes side by side with the curative care. They work together and usually very well. Occasionally there's tension between them, but often not. And so the curative, if you say have kidney disease, the curative doctor is really focused on your kidney. But the palliative doctor, the team, it's a team working side by side with a curative doctor, looks at the whole person, not just the kidney, the whole person, and looks, in fact, more than they look at the family. They look at the spouses, the partners, the children, to see what they can do to ease their physical and intellectual and emotional challenges, and for the patient, the symptoms. So if you're in great pain and discomfort, the palliative doctor really focuses on what they can do to ease those symptoms. Now, hospice care, and by the way, it's wonderful. Palliative care is wonderful, and everybody should ask for it. Almost all hospitals offer it in different degrees, and they should all offer it. Okay, now hospice care is a component of palliative care. Um, Hospice care is palliative care, but palliative care is a bigger circle, and hospice care is within the palliative care. And as we all know, hospice care is you have to be within 6 months of dying. It's called having a terminal illness. You give up curative care.
Mm.
You just have hospice care or palliative care, and it's very, very good. It's a wonderful thing, mostly paid for by Medicare, and you get given all sorts of equipment, and then you get checked in on once, twice a week by nurses from the hospice who check you're okay, and you may have an aide. There may be a hospital volunteer, someone like me. I'm a hospital volunteer to help. So this is hospice care, and it is just excellent. And we saw Jimmy Carter had it. Art Buchwald had it, and everybody should have it as they come to the end of their lives. The big problem is most people don't ask for it soon enough, and therefore don't take full advantage of it. Often, a non-profit hospices are the best, and they will often offer non-pharmacological treatments like hand massages, art therapy, music therapy, pet therapy, and so on, which can be very comforting to a dying person. So anyway, so that's palliative care, hospice care, and of course another thing is end of life doulas. End of life doulas are very good. They are non-medical, not covered by Medicaid. They're wonderful. They can help you with legacy projects. They can help you with writing letters to grandchildren. They can give you hand massages. They can just watch television with you. They can chat, or they can just sit there quietly. I mean, they can do anything. There's any number of things that end of life does, and they're very good because one thing hospice doesn't do is give you a lot of time. They don't have a lot of time, but an end of life doula it's as much time as you're willing to pay for.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking, what a great supplement to the caregiver, to give the caregiver time off.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. That is such a good point. Yeah, caregivers give respite. One way to give them respite is bring in an end of life doula so they can take some time off. Yep, absolutely.
Mm. And the other thing that I find so interesting I was reading that I've heard of birthing doulas
Yeah.
who know a great deal about birthing a child. It never occurred to me that, of course, there are things you need to understand about dying as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's where the doula name comes from. It first was used as birth doulas, as you point out, and then was taken by the end of life community, the people like me who deal with death and dying and we call them end of life. We used to call them death doulas. We now prefer the term end of life
And
doulas to distinguish them from funeral home guides, which help after the person has died.
wow. Hmm. I always hate to go into this subject, and yet, and because you've touched on it already, but this aspect of the fact that many times the caregiver and the person who has to be the executor and all tend to be the daughters. And you're a man. How can men take on a larger share, fair share of this?
Well, the shocking thing is, and this is what you're driving at, Madeline. The shocking thing is that women tend to take on far more care. I mean, to put it more specifically, daughters tend to do far more, give far more caregiving than their siblings, the male siblings, the sons. And this is, to me, shocking. And I write about this in my book, Achieving a Good Death. Um, the We have to change this. Men have to step up. I don't know if this is misogyny or what is it, but why? It's just totally unfair and unjust that daughters tend to carry a far larger burden than sons, and it just drives me crazy. And one thing I would like to see happen is that those daughters get paid out of the
Yes.
money
Okay.
that would have come as inheritance. Why don't they get it? If sons are too indolent or whatever the word is, insensitive, whatever the word is, if they are not willing to step up, then at least the daughters should be paid out of the resources available. So it's a big problem.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, on page 85 of your book, you say, when we are no longer here, our family and friends can
Ah.
find us in our children, grandchildren, nephews, and nieces. I loved that. Uh, I mean, I immediately thought of, well, so and so has my smile, and so and so. But what are some other things that you meant by that?
Inspiration to paint, ways of behaving, um, values like patience and courage. I mean, in other words, if you live a good life, and by that I don't mean having a fancy house or cars or a boat, nothing like that. What I mean is someone who is thoughtful and courageous and cheerful and takes care of other people and is sensitive to other people's feelings and is tolerant and and all these good values. If you're like that, you are living a life which other people can copy and emulate. And people do. I mean, children, grandchildren see what their grandparents are like, see what their parents are like, and tend to emulate them. They don't do what the parents say, they do what the parents do. That's what they copy. The actions, not the no good. It's no good of a grandparent or a grandparent saying, "Oh, you want to be thoughtful to other people," and if they behave thoughtlessly themselves, that's going to have a far bigger effect,
Absolutely.
obviously. So that's what I meant when I said that. And let me just quickly look up that page 85. That was interesting because I had another quote here. This is page 85. Historian Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote that Eleanor Roosevelt often quoted the lines, quote, "They are not dead. They are not dead. Who live in lives they leave behind in those whom they have blessed. They live a life again." In other words, when a grandparent blesses the life of a grandchild by
Mm.
living nobly, uh, well, um, exhibiting sound values, and the child picks up on those and emulates them. That's what I mean by you can see you live. You know, you go on living again. You live again because some of your values and character are in that grandchild.
I know we're going to have another show because there's a whole aspect of after the fact, shall we say, which people need to be prepared for. But I'm wondering I have one more question for you, but I'm going to hold it. Is there something that we touched on today that we need to go back to and add a little something to it? And I'm also curious about what your next book is about.
Okay. Well, if, on the first part of that, I think just I would emphasize to any and to your listeners and people watching this that do write an ethical will. We discussed that in the
Yes.
first discussion. That's a love letter to your loved ones, saying why you love them and how important they are. And to you and so on. Then I think writing an advanced directive I think is very important. And then adding to that a dementia rider to your advanced directive. This is a very important thing to do. So,
Now, what
so
does that mean? What does that mean,
what
Chris?
it means is it's a piece of paper which you add to your advanced directive, which describes how you want to be treated as your dementia advances. So when you have mild dementia and you still have mental capacity, you might say, well, do everything you can to keep me alive. When you have moderate dementia and you're losing that capacity of decision making, you might say, well, you don't have to get too fine. When you have advanced dementia and you're really out of it and don't know what's going on, don't recognize anybody and so on, you might then say, look, don't let me go. Find an exit. At that point, I don't want to be around. I don't want to have to experience the humiliation of advanced dementia. And please look for ways to give me an exit. So that example I gave earlier, if I get pneumonia, do not give me an antibiotic.
Mm.
If I need dialysis, don't give it to me. Let me slip away quietly and painlessly. So that's another thing to do. And by the way, the best place to find a dementia rider is on the Compassion and Choices website. So just go to the Compassion and Choices website. You can Google that. Compassion and Choices, a very good nonprofit organization, and they will. And I'll go to their website and just look for the dementia tool, the dementia values tool. It's called. I think very very similar to that. And just fill it out. It takes 20 minutes and just print it out and add it to your advanced directive. And so those are some things I would emphasize from our conversation today.
I wanted to know also what your next book was. I'm still reserving that last question.
So my next book is on humor and jokes. I was for 5 years a stand-up comic, but the book is about how jokes and humor can reveal wisdom and truth and insight in a very deft and clever way. So that's what the book's about. I'm working hard on it now. Bloomsbury will publish it in about 18 months.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really happy that you're doing it because, as I mentioned on the first show, your book is written in such a clear language. This is going to be another book that I will read for sure. When I do story work, I often talk about the jester because in royal times there was always a jester, and that person was allowed to tell
Yeah,
things about the king or the
yeah,
queen
yeah,
in with a humor,
yeah,
and yet oftentimes revealed incredible truths. So,
yeah.
oh, I'm excited about that book. Excellent. I'm really pleased. Now, okay, I'm going to sneak in one other question before my final. And that is, you often talk about the good life, and you just talked about a lot of living according to your ethics and your morals so that your children learn those things. But are there other aspects that you see that are important to prepare yourself for this end time?
Yes, I think my best answer to that, Madeline, is my book. I mean, because in there, I talk about how if you live well, I learned this from hospice nurses. If you live well, you are more likely to die well. By die well, I mean die peacefully, die painlessly, in your bed, at home, surrounded by a loving family, and so on. And being able to have those critical 5 conversations. I love you. Thank you. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Goodbye. And
Mm,
those conversations are often missing on at deathbeds. It's very, very sad. So I think living well to die well, and then all the other things we've talked about, doing an ethical will, realizing you have choices at the end of life. I
mm.
think we'll talk more about it in the third session, and knowing about the downsides of caregiving and how to look as like if you become a caregiver, how to look after yourself properly. So all the things laid out in my book are things you need to do to have a good death.
Well, I'm glad that I pressed on this because I kept thinking, well, what you mean is to stay healthy, but it's much, much more than just staying healthy.
Oh yes,
It's
yes.
it's
There's
surrounding yourself with a community.
absolute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah. No. Health is very important because it increases your health span. If you don't smoke, if you exercise, if you eat properly, eat a good diet, and so on, then you get a larger health span.
Yeah.
And that's good because we want to have the largest health spans possible. That means the number of years where you are healthy. But living a good life is far more than that. Is having lots of friends, caring friends, friends that you living in a community, throwing your life behind a cause that really is worthwhile, doing something which is bigger than you, living according to your values, always being honest and so on. These things is what I mean by a good life. It's not just health. It's far more than that, as I
Uh,
lay out in my book.
oh, thank you so much for that. All right, now I'm going to ask you my final question. You raised two questions for us to ponder. Did my life matter? And what did my life mean? I, talk about these. Why is it helpful to actually try to answer these questions?
Yes, thank you for asking that question because it's so important, and none of us dwell on these questions enough. And they are not just questions for people my age or at the end of life, in the third of your life. No, these are questions to pose
Mm,
when you're much younger. In fact, I would love to see um, teenagers, high school kids in high school take classes in the struggling to answer those two questions. How do I design a life that matters, and how do I create a life that has meaning and purpose? These are so foundational, these questions. And if you don't wrestle with them, if you don't tackle them, if you don't think about them, if you um, neglect them, you are really almost asking for a life which is going to be less rich than it otherwise would have been. Because when we ask those questions, what does my life mean and does my life matter? We're really going to the fundamentals of what our lives are about. Why are we here? What are we here for? And asking those questions is incredibly important.
mm,
And this is why I recommend to people, and I have one myself, a personal mission statement. And if people are interested in seeing mine, you can see my website, www.chrispalmeronline.com. You can go there, you can see my personal mission statement. And what it is it lays out a credo, and incredibly important thing for all of us to have one. It doesn't have to be as long as mine; it can be short, but something in writing which describes what matters to us and what gives our lives meaning and purpose. And I think it's important to remember too that meaning and purpose aren't out there for us to be discovered. No, they are there for us to create and design. This is how we find meaning and purpose, by creating it ourselves, by throwing our lives into important causes that mean something to us. So thank you for asking that question, Madeline. These two questions are important for us to ask when we're very young and to keep asking as we grow older.
I love the fact that you say that teenagers should begin to to wrestle with this because in fact they do when they are choosing which college to go to or which trade school to go to or what trade to go into.
Right.
All of those are early statements that are projections of where they're going to end up.
Yeah.
So I think I have to do a piece on that. I'll do a piece on that. Thank you, Chris. You know what I find so amazing as I talk with you about death of all things is that I never get sad when I
No.
talk to you. It's sort of like, well, that's how it is. You know, it's life.
Yeah, I run a death and dying group. We meet every month. I've been doing it for 10 years, and we have the best fun. People are laughing, and it doesn't have to be a morbid, somber
Yeah,
subject at all. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject to learn about.
yeah. Again, Chris, thank you. And remind people that your website also has lots of freebies on it. Okay. And you'll be back with one more show. Now, this show is going to be aired in April, and the other one will be in May. So we're stretching it out so people have time to get your book and read it. Chris, thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me, Madeline.
You're so welcome. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. In his book, Chris gives us two questions to ask. Did my life matter? And what did my life mean? I'd like to reflect on these two questions, not from the end of my life, but from today as I live my life, because those two questions influence everyday choices, even now, hopefully long before the end. 3 years ago, I interviewed Beth Leisure Hudson. She is a national champion and world-class competitive cyclist. Today, in her 60s, she is still winning races, and I don't mean local ones, I mean world-class races. She was an amazing interview because the level of athlete, or maybe I say that level of athlete, tells a very different story. Beth decided that she wanted to have another conversation, but one where she could ask the questions. Now, how could I resist that invitation? I mean, when you spend hours listening to answers, there's that occasional moment when you would like to answer the question yourself. I mean, if you listen to me, you know that every now and then I do answer the question too, or tell a story about the same issue. But to have the floor to myself was most attractive. It didn't matter that the audience would only be her and her three friends. So what questions would she ask? Would her friends ask me questions too? And would her questions be about my work, how I got where I am, who was an inspiration to me, what do I advise others? Well, she began with a question that went something like this: Madelyn, what would you tell your younger self to emphasize for longevity and legacy? The question surprised me, but in a really wonderful way. And what it meant was that it was what energizes me as I do what I do and implies the question of why do I do what I do? Now, you can tell that this conversation went in a different direction than my expectations, and one that demanded that I think about my answers. And it was fun and rewarding because I heard myself saying things I had not ever articulated before. I talked about eating foods that make me feel good and avoiding the foods that my mother would say, they don't like me. I talked about creating relationships that support me and, quite frankly, avoiding ones that don't. I talked about being a lifelong learner, stimulated by my insatiable curiosity and supported by lots of reflection. Now, as I reflected on my responses, I dug even deeper and can now see much more behind my animation. Remember the question, what would you tell your younger self to emphasize for longevity and legacy? Well, my energy has two sources. The first is that I have a metabolism that runs high. I mean, if I were a car, my engine would be a Porsche. The second source is my curiosity. I mean, if my curiosity were anything, it would be a 2-year-old, looking into everything, pushing every boundary, climbing anything that with handholds. Then there was that related question: why do I do what I do? That's getting very close to the question that Palmer asks in his book, Achieving a Good Death. To answer, I need to give you some background. I was raised in a house where I was taught that every person is worthy of respect because they're put on this earth for a reason. Now, that's a heavy message, but, as a child, you don't know it's heavy. You just figure, hey, it must be right. My parents said so. And so I saw the world as being full of people who were put here by a supreme being for a particular purpose. And over the years, I realized that everything is put on the earth for a purpose. From my parents, who were supposed to prepare me to be ready to do my purpose, to the tree in the front yard who dutifully produced oxygen day after day. Now, when you believe that everything has a purpose, you realize at one point that you must have a purpose too. So I had 2 jobs to do. The first was to work to discover my purpose, or maybe as Chris says, to create my purpose. And second was to live it. Now, living my purpose means that I must somewhere inside me have all that it takes to achieve it. I mean, why would a supreme being create something for a purpose without assuring that the potential to achieve it was not part of the creation? You have to have agency. Once I came to that conclusion, I realized that if I helped people recognize they have agency, then they would know they could accomplish their purpose. Now, as I write this, it feels almost childish, yet it is indeed what motivates me to do what I do. When I was called in by organizations, for example, to help them resolve a problem, I knew that if they didn't believe they had the capacity to solve it, nothing from me would do the trick. All I had to do was help them see a little bit more about the issue. I mean, as a consultant, that was my job, part of it. And then what are the options that might resolve it? And I worked to help them identify as many of the options as they could before I gave them my own insights. Now, I realize now that I was helping them see the agency they already had within them. Today, I still work to show people they have capabilities and competencies and agency within them. As I have done this, I began to realize that among the many gifts I was given to achieve my purpose, I was given the gift to see the talents and skills and capabilities and competencies of others. Truly. That's why today I love coaching people, especially young people who haven't had time and experience to see these for themselves. Now, as I don't work with most of you in my audience or even know you personally, I choose to do so by providing information and knowledge that will help you discover yourself, that will give you options. And as you know, if you listen to my shows, knowing who you are is foundational to having resilience. Because once you know who you are, no one can disrupt you permanently because you know who you are, and that's something they can't take from you. Does my life matter? It will matter only if I continue to help others see their own capabilities and competencies and know they have agency. What does my life mean? It means that some people found great treasure in themselves because I did something that inspired them to look for that treasure. My question to you is, when was the first time you realized you brought more to the table than you thought? I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope this conversation has offered not just new ideas, but a different way of considering control at a time when we least think of being in control. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.